When I walked into the courtroom that morning, the oak benches creaked like they recognized me. My son, Nathan, rolled his shoulders and whispered something sharp to his wife, Kim, the way you speak when you want your words to hurt without traveling past your own row. The bailiff called for silence. Papers rustled, shoes scuffed. And then the judge looked up, froze completely, and said in a voice quiet enough to make the whole room lean in, "It's her." Kim frowned. Nathan blinked. The county seal on the wall seemed to tilt a degree, and with that one startled sentence, everything I had been for months, confused, contained, handled, fell away. Every head in the courtroom turned toward me as if I'd just stepped out of a photograph they'd all seen years ago and couldn't place. Nobody knew who I really was until that moment. They thought I was a story you hear in line at the pharmacy, or a cautionary tale whispered in church. They had no idea that once, in a fluorescent refrigerator of a hospital, I had stood up to a man with a nameplate and a title and saved a life that would come back for me. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 71 years old, a retired ICU nurse who still wakes up at 5 without an alarm, as if a ventilator somewhere needs an extra pair of eyes. If you had stepped into my kitchen a few months ago, you'd have found a Texas blue bonnet of a mug chipped along the rim, steam curling from coffee I took black, and a row of African violets along the window that loved morning light more than anything else. My husband, Mark, was the one who coaxed them from leaves. He taught me plants the way I taught him spices. We laughed that we had traded hobbies when we retired, him with soil under his nails, me with paprika on my fingers. The violets still bloomed after he died, tiny stubborn cups of color in a world that had cooled without him. Nathan didn't like my violets. He never said that outright. But the week after Mark's funeral, he walked to my sink with 3 steps too loud and said, "Mom, these things drip." "The water stains your sill. The pots have trays," I said mildly. "They only drip if you overdo it." He smiled like I'd proven his point, like I always would. He used to laugh easily when he was a boy, laugh with his whole ribs, his head thrown back so his hair fell into his eyes. We were a pair then, Mark working nights and me working days, 2 ships that met in the kitchen to pass notes and breakfast. I don't know when Nathan's laugh learned to hide. Maybe when the world started measuring him. Maybe when he married Kim, who managed everything with a calendar and a white-tooth smile that could cut silk. I set a plate of blueberry pancakes on the table like always. Nathan and Kim ate with the perfunctory rhythm of people between errands. Kim dabbed at her lips with a napkin after every bite. Nathan scrolled his phone. "Mom," he said, like a sentence already half-spoken, "we found a place." "A place? For you." "For now. Until, we can figure out the house. It's called Maple Ridge Care and Rehabilitation. Real nice. Activities. Nurses on every floor." "I have a nurse," I said, in the mirror. Kim looked up. "Evelyn, we know you're capable, but this house is a lot. You fell in the garden last month. I tripped over a hose," I said, "and I stood back up." "She forgot the stove," Nathan said. He didn't look at me when he said it. "The kettle boiled dry." "That kettle was older than you. It whistled like a train and dented if you breathed on it." I tossed it and replaced it the same afternoon Kim folded her napkin, unfolded it, folded it again. "Maple Ridge has all the amenities, gym, therapy, book club. It's temporary. We'll get your affairs in order, sell the house for..." She glanced at Nathan. "The market's up." "You can move closer to us later," Nathan added quickly. "A condo, something with elevators." I looked around at my kitchen, the worn floor swollen a little along the seam near the back door, the corner where Mark always scraped his chair because he refused to lift it, the clock that had been 10 minutes fast for 22 years, so I could be early to everything. I touched the windowsill, the little chips that looked like freckles. I thought of Mark's hands. I pictured him pinching my chin and saying, "Evie, you decide." "When do I tour it?" I asked, because I'd learned in the ICU that you do not yank a patient's hand from a tube mid-breath. You ease, you ask, you gather information like oxygen. "Tomorrow," Nathan said with relief. "You already made the appointment," I said. "It's easier to cancel than schedule," he answered, and we all pretended that was true. Maple Ridge looked like a hotel from a distance. Brick, windows all the same size, a green sign with a leaf that promised tranquility in a font someone chose because soft letters sell. Inside it smelled like lemon cleaner, and something underneath lemon cleaner that knew too much about nights. The hallways were full of framed photographs of smiling seniors playing bingo under a banner, seniors shaping clay bowls, seniors holding a therapy dog that looked like a stuffed animal with batteries. It might have matched one of those pictures if not for the way two aides pushed a man in a wheelchair sideways to get around a parked med cart overflowing with labeled plastic cups. The man's head fell onto his chest, and he didn't lift it, didn't stir when the cart bumped his knee. Kim talked to the admissions director while Nathan nodded like he'd rehearsed. "Care plans individually tailored," the director said. "We pride ourselves on family involvement." "And medical oversight?" Nathan asked, as if he were the concerned party. "We have a medical director on call in partnerships with 2 hospitals," the director recited. "Physical therapy 5 days a week if needed, social workers, a chaplain, holiday dinners." "I can cook," I said. I wasn't trying to antagonize. I just needed to hear my own voice. "Of course," the director said brightly, "in our independent wing." "But your son mentioned some cognitive concerns?" "What cognitive concerns?" I asked Nathan. "Mom," he said, not answering, "let's not do this here." We did it there. At the admissions desk with a pen chained to a clipboard under a poster of a family with teeth like polished piano keys, my son slid me a stack of papers that said temporary guardianship and power of attorney, the way a server slides you a dessert menu as if it is a favor, only for transitions, he said, to pay bills, to make sure nothing slips. "Mark took care of the bills," I said gently. "I know where his files are." "Mom," he said again, and the word carried years in it. Soccer games, scraped knees, field trip, permission slips. He sat too close and kept his hand on my forearm the way nurses learn to hold someone for a blood draw. Not cruel, firm, familiar with compliance. I am not a woman who cries. I learned years ago how to swallow tears until I could put them somewhere private. But that afternoon, with Kim saying the word "just too much," just a signature, just for a while, just until, weighing down my name like a coat I didn't choose, I signed. I signed because I had been a nurse for 42 years and had learned which arguments you win by stepping back. I signed because grief makes you believe your bones are brittle. I signed because I didn't want Nathan to look at me like I was not following instructions. "Just a few weeks," he said, hugging me with his cheeks stiff against my hair. "You'll make friends." I made no friends at Maple Ridge for the first 2 weeks because they tucked me in. That is the only way I know to say it. They tucked me into soft routines that didn't belong to me. They woke me at 6 when I was already awake. They put me to bed at 8 when the summer light still laid a stripe across the carpet. They offered me pills for adjustment that left my tongue thick and my hands slow. I swallowed 1 dose and wrote the name in my notebook with letters that slurred. "Lorazepam," I wrote, then scratched 2 lines underneath like rails. "PRN," the med nurse had chirped. As needed, she needed me to need it. On the 3rd night, when the same nurse whose name tag said Mandy rolled in with the little cart and the cups, I said, "Miss Mandy, I'll pass." "Doctor's orders," she said. "Doctor's suggestions," I said evenly, and "as needed" means I get to say when I need. Mandy looked at my chart like it might contradict me. "Your son told us you have trouble sleeping." "My son isn't here," I said, and folded my hands in my lap the way my mother taught me to fold them in church when I disagreed with a sermon. Mandy's eyes cooled. She set the cup down on the tray and wheeled on. 10 minutes later, I could hear whispers outside my door, the low burr of an administrator's voice, and the stiff tone of a nurse who was about to be written up. The next night, they brought a different pill, tiny white, wearing a line down its middle like a frown. "This one's gentler," the nurse said, hopefully. "I'll be gentler when I get to choose," I answered. She set the cup down and didn't move. I took it, put it to my lips, tilted my head as if I'd swallowed, tucked the pill into the soft cup of my cheek, and smiled. She wheeled away, satisfied. When she turned the corner, I spit the pill into a Kleenex and tucked it under the bed alarm mat. I'm not a saint. I'm a nurse. My roommate, Lila, was a silver-haired woman with a laugh like bells and an oxygen cannula taped to her cheek with a looping flourish the nurses made too tight. "You one of the problems?" she asked me the first night in a voice so dry it could have cut kindling. "I suppose," I said. "Good," she grinned. "We'll get along." She called the aides my girls, although 2 of them were older than we were. She crocheted in bed with her oxygen tubing curling like a cat and told me stories about a husband who could pick out any song on the piano after hearing it once, a husband now gone 2 decades and still everywhere. Lila didn't like her nighttime either. "Makes me fuzzy," she said, "and then I see my Jack in the corner, but he's the wrong age." "Then we won't take it," I said. We were clandestine about many things. Sugar packets stolen from the dining cart when the dietitian said no more, winter peppermint candies smuggled in a sock drawer. But nothing felt more radical than choosing not to be sedated. You learn a place by its rhythms. The aide who hums without noticing, the nurse whose shoes squeak, the administrator whose heels signal trouble. Maple Ridge had a good heart in it somewhere. I could feel it beating under the layers of policy and spreadsheet, but it had developed bad habits. Physical therapy signed off on sessions when the therapist never appeared. The activities calendar was taped up every Monday like a promise. Most days, bingo happened on the TV because the activities coordinator was covering the front desk. Lunch portions shrank when the regional director visited because the budget needed pretty numbers. None of these are crimes on their own. Together, they make a place smell wrong. On the 6th morning, a young woman stepped into our room with a laundry bag and a breath that carried peppermint and worry. Her badge read, JASMINE. Her eyes read, "Don't let them see me care." "You're the nurse," she said softly, glancing at the hall. "From Riverside Hospital." "Mrs. Hart." "I was," I said. "My Grandma June said you held her hand when she thought she was going to die. She said you told her, 'You're not leaving me on my shift.'" "I say that a lot," I smiled. "Jasmine looked like a kid and a woman in the same face. They wrote you down for exit-seeking behavior because you wanted to walk outside yesterday. They do that to make the fall risk look appropriate on paper." "Did I fall?" I asked. "No," she said. "You walked 2 laps around the courtyard without touching the rail. They charted impulsive ambulation anyway." She hesitated. "I'm not supposed to tell you that." "I'm not supposed to tell you anything. Then don't," I said. "Visit me and talk about crocheting. Tell me what yarn to buy when my son takes me to the craft store. If statistics fall out of your mouth as you speak, I can't help it." She laughed without sound. "They'll move me to nights if they hear." "Nights are quieter," I said. "Nights are where they hide things," she answered, and in that sentence I recognized a kindred spirit, the kind who saw what nights asked of people and kept receipts. I began to keep my own receipts. Nursing is a profession of lists and little bracelets, of timestamps and initials. I had always loved it, its dignity in the details, and as a patient, I treated myself the way I had treated the people I loved. I kept a notebook and wrote down everything. Times, pills, names. 2:07 a.m. bed alarm triggered when I stood. Alarm delayed 30 seconds before aid response. 9:45 a.m. Pacific time never arrived. OT signed sheet. 1:15 p.m. Mandy said, "You don't want to cause problems, do you?" when I refused Ativan. I printed neatly like I was charting on a paper flow sheet in 1989 again. I tucked the notebook into the pocket of my cardigan and taped a second one under the seat of my wheelchair. I told Lila I was practicing my handwriting. She snorted. "You're practicing your freedom." Nathan visited twice that first week. Short visits, his eyes always sliding to the nurse's station. Kim came once with a plastic smile and a paper bag that held a cardigan too thin for air conditioning. They brought brochures for secure memory care wings at other facilities, as if showing me choices would trick my feet into staying still. "We talked to a realtor," Kim said, and my heart dropped. "We put the house on the market," Nathan added quickly, as if speed could make the knife clean. "It's too much, Mom." "You'll thank us later." "Tell the realtor to water the violets," I said. "And if you think I was being petty, you have never loved something small while losing something large." "They'll stage it," Kim said. "The plants go." On a Tuesday, I woke to the sound of an argument in the hall. A woman's voice trembled, then hardened. "You can't just increase her dose because she's agitated." A man's voice, flat and administrative. "Families sign consent forms for adjustments." "Consent isn't carte blanche," the woman snapped. I liked her already without seeing her. I pulled on my robe and rolled toward the doorway. The woman was 30 at most, dark hair in a neat bun, scrubs that actually fit. Her badge read, Teresa, RN. The man she faced wore a tie that belonged to a different suit and an expression that belonged to a different job. Administrator, his badge read. He smiled at me like I was a customer in line. "Mrs. Hart, right in time. We're updating a few care plans, ensuring comfort." "Comfort is a beautiful word," I said. "It becomes a weapon when you use it to quiet pain instead of treat it." Teresa flicked her eyes at me. Quick gratitude. "We need to reassess half our night meds," she said. "A third of our residents are more confused in the morning than at bedtime. Tinita." "That means the medicine is working," the administrator said blandly. "That means the medicine is doing something," I corrected. "Working depends on the goal." He smoothed his tie. "Nurses handle nursing." "I handle compliance, then comply with common sense," I said. He didn't like that, but I hadn't liked him first. That afternoon, a letter arrived at Maple Ridge addressed in a hand that was careful and looping, the kind of penmanship you practice on purpose. It was forwarded from my house. The envelope was thick, the kind people use for wedding invitations or legal threats. When I opened it, 3 things fell into my lap: a letter on heavy cream paper, a photocopy of a newspaper article with a photograph of my 29-year-old self holding a swaddled infant near a wall of monitors, and a card that said prayer in block letters. I read the letter first. "Dear Mrs. Hart, you do not know me. My name is Dr. Addison Ray Whitfield. 22 years ago, at Riverside Hospital, a nurse named Evelyn Hart refused to let a resident and a supervisor discharge my mother after a hemorrhage. She called the OB attending. She stayed late. She held my mother's face and said, 'Stay with me.' And because of that, I was born alive, and we both survived. Growing up, my mother told me a story every birthday that began with your name. I'm writing now because I serve on the board of the Ray Family Health Trust. Our foundation recently purchased a stake in Stonebrook Holdings, the parent company of Maple Ridge Care and Rehabilitation. When we reviewed facilities and quality metrics, your name flashed through my head, and I wondered where you were. I Googled. I read Mark's obituary. I found a realtor's listing with your violet window in the background. I am so sorry for your loss. I am so sorry for what appears to be happening to you. If this letter reaches you, please know you are not alone. If you can write back, do. If you cannot, circle the word prayer on the enclosed card and give it to a staff member. They will know to call the number on the back, and a chaplain we employ will arrive. We built that system after cases like yours. If convenient, call me directly. If not, hold on. Help is on the way. With gratitude and stubborn hope, Addison, I held the letter against my chest and laughed from a place so deep it sounded like a sob. Lila sat up. "What is it, Evie? Good news or trouble?" "Both," I said. She reached for my hand and squeezed it. I sent the prayer card with Jasmine at the end of her shift, tucked into a folded crochet square. "A friend from church," I said, and her eyes softened because we both knew how to hand something forward while pretending it weighed nothing at all. Maple Ridge ran on 2 kinds of people. The ones who got into elder care because they thought old people were adorable until old people were complicated, and the ones who got into elder care because a grandmother taught them something that never left. Jasmine was the second kind. So was Teresa. So was a janitor named Marco who whistled while he mopped and left floors clean enough to see what you'd missed. Lines form naturally, I've learned, even in places that flatten everything. Moral fault lines. You begin to notice who stands where. 2 days after I sent the card, a chaplain arrived, not one of Maple Ridge's, but a woman in a gray blazer with a gentle mouth and eyes that took in details without making you feel like a specimen. She asked if she could pray and then whispered, while her head stayed bowed, "Addison is 3 minutes away. Nod if you consent to a visitor." I nodded. The door opened again, and a woman my granddaughter's age, if I'd had one, stepped into my room wearing a navy suit and a heartbeat you could feel across the carpet. The first thing I noticed were her eyes. They were steady. The second thing was a faint scar near her left temple, a hairline nick that glinted only when she turned her head. She sat on the edge of the chair and switched to first names like we were both wearing scrubs. "Evelyn," she said. "I'm Addison. Thank you for my life." People throw those words around. They say it when someone lends jumper cables or a recipe. But when Addison said them, the air changed. Lila took a breath through her nose and smiled at me as if to say, "This is one of the good ones." Addison put the newspaper clipping on my lap like an offering. It was from the Columbus Dispatch, dated 22 years earlier, beneath a headline about "Local Nurse's Persistence Saves Mother and Child." I remembered the night. I remembered the residents' impatience and the attending's humility, the way blood can be both terrifying and ordinary when you know what to do with it. I remembered the baby's cry, huge and outraged. "You were 2 hours old when this picture was taken," I said softly, "and mad at all of us." "I still am sometimes," she smiled. "I grew out of it more slowly than my brother would like." She folded her hands. "Tell me about Maple Ridge." I told her. I told her what the lemon cleaner covered and what it didn't. I told her about PRN sedatives turned into habits, about therapy billed to paper that never touched bodies, about the administrator who believed compliance was a synonym for compassion. I told her in the language that had built my life. Vitals, assessments, deviations, timestamps. Addison listened like someone trained to find patterns. She asked me to repeat dates. She asked the names of aides and nurses and which ones looked away. She looked out the window once at the small square of grass and then back at me like she was measuring the size of a problem against the size of a woman. "My brother, Lucas, is the CFO at Stonebrook," she said at last. "He loves numbers the way I love people. We make a decent team. After my mom's case, my father put his energy into building a foundation that funds maternal and elder care. When Stonebrook needed cash, we stepped in so we could push reforms. We promised ourselves we wouldn't let our investment go to good spreadsheets over bad nights." She stood. "Do you feel up to a visitor 1 floor down?" "Who?" I asked. "The administrator," she said. "His tie or his boss?" "Both," she answered. And I felt the slow smile of a nurse who has just learned the name of a drug and can finally treat the thing she recognizes. The administrator put on his company face for Addison. It fit him better than his tie. He led us into a conference room and offered bottled water like it counted as hospitality. Addison didn't drink. She put her folder on the table with a sound like a gavel. "This is Mrs. Hart," she said, without looking at him. "She saved my mother's life and mine. If there is one person in this building whose words you should not wallpaper over, it is hers. We own a significant stake in your parent company. I requested an internal audit a week ago after a preliminary review. Today, I'm here to ask questions before the audit team arrives." He swallowed. "Of course." "Of course" is an empty phrase, she said cordially. "Let's use yes or no. Do you chart therapy sessions that do not happen? Do you request PRN sedatives to manage staff ratios? Do you bill for one-to-one observation without providing it?" He floundered. Kim would have said his eyes were goldfishing. "Our nurses are understaffed," he said. "We do our best." "Understaffing is a problem," Addison said. "Fraud is a choice." When families signed powers of attorney, did you present them with any conflict of interest disclosures for the physician group you employ? Do you explain to residents that declining sedatives will not affect their care? He blinked. Our consent forms are standard. And what about this item? She slid a photocopy across the table. A fall risk note entered at 10:01 a.m. states that Mrs. Hart attempted to leave premises via lobby for no clear purpose. At 10 a.m., the activities calendar shows a posted walking club courtyard lapse. Why would a scheduled activity be documented as exit-seeking behavior? Clerical error, he said. New staff. She didn't say anything for 3 full seconds. He filled the silence with an apology that sounded like a half-off coupon. Addison turned to me. Evelyn, do you want help? Yes, I said. Then it will be messy, she replied, calm as rain. But it will be help. That afternoon, an attorney named Victoria Hernandez walked in with pumps too practical for vanity and a satchel that looked like it had filed cases by itself. She shook my hand, asked me to tell her everything, and wrote down not only what I said, but how I said it. Guardianship hearings move quickly, she said, especially when a son has paperwork and a facility nods along. But judges like facts. They like orderly minds. You have both. I also have a son, I said, and the words lodged like a burr. We will not turn this into a public execution, Victoria said softly. The system that swallowed you has mechanisms inside it for correction. We'll use those. If that needs a public light, we'll aim it there. If it needs a private apology, we'll hold for one. An apology? I asked. From whom? She didn't answer. I respected her more for that than for anything else she did that week. Nathan called that night. He was angry in a way that sent me back to when he was 12 and kicked a soccer ball at our fence so hard the slats shook. What are you doing, Mom? Drinking chamomile and reading, I said. This night, like many others. An audit? A lawyer? Do you know what you're starting? An end, I said, to something that should never have begun. Don't go dramatics, He snapped. You fell. You forgot things. We helped. I forgot nothing that mattered, I said. I tripped over a hose. And you remembered everything that made me small. Kim and I are trying to protect you. I looked at the window as if the violets might still be there. Protect me from what? From yourself, he said sharply, and hung up. My breath came shallow. Lila reached across the space between our beds and put her hand on my wrist where my pulse felt too fast. Men panic when they are caught between what they did and who they think they are, she said. Give him a minute. Give yourself 2. The internal audit arrived the next morning with clipboards and questions that ignored posters. I watched the administrator's mouth tighten as he followed Addison down the hall. I kept my notebook on my lap and added one more entry. 11:53 a.m. saw 3 people with eyes like flashlights. Teresa winked as she passed our door, relief radiating off her skin like summer heat. Jasmine smiled into her laundry bag. In the days before the hearing, Maple Ridge changed too visibly to be permanent. Activities happened at exactly the posted times. Physical therapists appeared like a parade. The med cart moved quietly with checks and counter signatures. A new sign materialized in the lobby about resident rights. Poster board printed last minute with ink still glossy, like a conscience-bought retail. The changes made me angrier than the neglect because they proved someone had chosen laziness when rigor was possible. It felt like a boy who suddenly remembered to call you Mom when money stood nearby. Victoria met with me every afternoon. We wrote dates on yellow sticky notes and mapped them to the little lies of a building. We organized refusal to consent forms, my notebook entries, Medicare statements, and the one precious printout of my medication administration record for a week in which someone had charted a sedative at 9 p.m. that I had not taken. Is this enough? I asked, staring at the neat, accusing pile. It is enough to start, she said. And Addison's audit has its own stack. Fraud is a house built by many hands. We will invite them all to look at what they made. On the morning of the hearing, I put on the blue dress Mark loved because it made my skin look warm and tied a scarf around my neck in my mother's style, loose enough to undo quickly if someone needed a vein. Old habits ease you. Jasmine hugged me hard at the lobby while pretending to adjust my cardigan. Do good trouble, she whispered. Always, I said. Lila waved like a queen in a convertible. "Bring me a story," she called, "and if they arrest you for contempt, make sure they take a good mugshot." Franklin County Probate Court is a building that tries not to feel like a building where people's lives are upended while somebody punches a keypad for the bathroom door. The elevators are slow, and the hall carpet pretends at hotel. Nathan waited on a bench in a navy suit he wore to job interviews. Kim sat very straight beside him and did not look at me when I approached. Her eyelids were whiter than the rest of her face. When I said hello, she said, "Let's not make a scene." "As if scenes happen by accident," I said mildly, and then the bailiff called our case. The judge was a man in his 50s with hair that didn't know which way it wanted to gray and eyes that settled on papers like he wanted them to behave. When he looked up, his expression did not match the pages. It shifted in a way that made my chest go tight and loose at the same time. He blinked. His gavel hand trembled once, the way a person's hand trembles before they catch a memory, and then he said it. 2 words that set the room at an angle. "It's her." The clerk looked at him. Nathan looked at me. The judge cleared his throat and pressed his lips together as if to pull back the words. He smiled, and for a second he lost 30 years in his face. "Mrs. Hart," he said more formally, "this is unexpected." "Good morning, Your Honor," I said calmly, because calm is a medicine you can swallow even when your pulse scampers. He set his pen down. "We'll compose ourselves. Counsel, proceed." His voice returned to official air, but every now and then, as lawyers spoke, he glanced at me with an expression a man wears when he recognizes the person who held his wife's hand when she bled and told him where to stand so he wouldn't faint. You see? That was it. Years ago, before he wore the robe, when he was a public defender with a head full of statutes and a stomach full of coffee, his wife hemorrhaged after the birth of their son. The resident missed it. I didn't. I kept them both alive with the kind of stubbornness God either gave me or I stubborned into being. I didn't remember him immediately. It had been a dark, adrenaline-lit room like 1,000 other rooms, but I remembered his wife's freckles when he said her first name. The past reaches across years like a hand. Nathan's attorney made his case first. He used words like safety and concern and decline. He said them the way people pour oil on a conversation, so the ugly thing slides through easier. He painted my refusal of sedatives as denial and my insistence on walking as dangerous. He called Maple Ridge award-winning. He called me non-compliant. He did not say that non-compliant sometimes means the patient knows their body better than your form. Victoria stood next. She didn't lift her chin. She didn't raise her voice. She handed the judge my notebook and spoke like someone reading instructions to land a plane. Mrs. Hart is a retired ICU nurse with 42 years of service at Riverside and St. Augustine. She kept meticulous notes at Maple Ridge. We submit exhibits A through G, medication records with discrepancies, therapy billing sheets signed without sessions, statements from Nurse Teresa and aide Jasmine corroborating routine sedation to manage staffing shortages, and the preliminary findings of an internal audit initiated by a major stakeholder, the Ray Family Health Trust. Nathan's attorney objected to the audit as outside the scope. The judge overruled him gently. "We are determining capacity and need," he said. "Evidence of an environment that undermines either belongs in this room." Addison sat in the back row with Lucas beside her, calm as a bowstring. When Victoria called her to testify, she walked to the stand in flats that made no sound, swore in, and placed both hands on the ledge in front of her like she could hold up the building with her fingers. She told the court in clear, non-indicting language that Stonebrook Holdings, Maple Ridge's parent, was under review. She described overbilled therapies and sedative patterns. She did not use the word fraud. She used, "We are concerned." It landed heavier. "And your relationship to Mrs. Hart?" Victoria asked. "I owe her my life," Addison said simply. The courtroom shifted. Someone coughed and turned it into a throat clear. Someone else adjusted a paper that didn't need adjusting. Lucas testified second. If Addison was warmth, Lucas was clarity. He mapped numbers like highways. By the time he finished, you could see how Maple Ridge had gotten lost. The administrator tried to salvage dignity. He spoke about understaffing, about COVID, about stress. He did not speak about choices. Victoria did not attack him. She offered him a chance. Do you acknowledge that sedatives were used as restraints? He swallowed. Sometimes we do what we need to keep residents safe. Thank you, she said softly, and his shoulders slumped in defeat because it was worse to be thanked for telling the truth than to win on a lie. Finally, I took the stand. I had been on that side of a courtroom once before as a nurse advocate, and it felt strange to be the subject instead of the witness. Victoria asked me to state my name, my experience, my daily routines, my refusals, and why I made them. I answered simply. I did not perform. When Nathan's attorney cross-examined, he asked me what year it was. I told him. He asked me the president. I told him. He asked me my birthday. I told him and waited. When did your husband die? He asked, intending to find the soft spot in my voice. January 7th, 3 winters ago, I said, and did not cry. He frowned, annoyed he didn't get the scene he wanted. When it was Nathan's turn, his face was tight with something between shame and stubbornness. He looked at me only when Victoria asked, "Did you sell your mother's car without her consent?" "I had power of attorney," he said. "Did you stage her house for sale and remove her belongings without a list?" she asked. "We took what mattered," he said. "To whom?" Victoria asked. Nathan's jaw set. "To us," he said, and that really was the truth of it all. Not fact, but angle. Kim avoided the stand entirely. She sat with her ankles crossed and stared at the seal on the wall like it owed her money. The judge took a long time with his notes. He leaned back once and studied the ceiling like it had an answer. When he finally lifted his gavel again, he smiled at me with humility. I respected all the more because he wore a robe. "Mrs. Hart," he said, a little formally to keep the room even. "I recognized your name because 22 years ago at Riverside Hospital, a nurse refused to let a tired system do the easy thing. My son just started college. He exists because someone told me where to stand and how not to faint. This court appreciates your years of service. More importantly, it acknowledges the person in front of me today. The petition for permanent guardianship is denied. Powers of attorney are suspended pending a review. The court orders an independent capacity evaluation not performed by any provider associated with Maple Ridge or its parent company to be completed within 2 weeks. Further, this court refers Maple Ridge's recent practices to the state ombudsman and attorney general for review. Mrs. Hart, you may decide where you will reside until the evaluation is complete." With reasonable support, Nathan made a strangled sound. It wasn't a word. Kim finally looked at me. She had always been beautiful in the way of catalog models. For the first time, I saw a girl who had taught herself how not to cry. Afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Nathan walked up to me like a boy approaching the deep end. "Mom," he said, and his voice was not a knife. "What do I do now?" "You apologize," I said. "Not for worrying, for not trusting my yes and my no. And then you pay attention to the people who can't speak as loudly as I can." He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not to me," I said. "To Lila." He blinked. It took him a second to understand. "To Lila? Bring her yarn," I said, "and tell her you like her laugh. She will forgive you on behalf of the younger versions of both of us." That afternoon, I went home. Not to my home. Mine was under contract, and I did not want to step into a room where my violets had been thrown out like brochures, but to an apartment arranged by Addison near a park with a fountain that splashed in a sound like children. Victoria came with a mountain of forms and a bowl of faux. Addison brought a plant, not violets, a philodendron with leaves like open hands. "Low maintenance," she said, "hard to kill even by stress." "Nothing good is hard to kill," I said. "We just try." The capacity evaluator sat in my living room the following week and tested me like I was a crossword puzzle. I answered. When he asked me to draw a clock face showing 10 past 11, I did it with a second hand and a little flourish, because you're allowed to be yourself even when other people hold a pen over your future. He cleared me with a sentence so direct it made me laugh. "This woman is not incompetent," he wrote. "She's inconvenient to people who prefer ease." The Attorney General opened an investigation into Stonebrook facilities statewide. The news did not say my name. It did not need to. Addison's audit became less an audit and more a mirror. Lucas worked 18-hour days for 6 weeks and looked like a man who liked work in a way that kept him alive. Maple Ridge's administrator resigned. Teresa was promoted to director of nursing. Jasmine got a raise she texted me about with 15 crying emojis and a picture of her grandmother holding a frying pan like a trophy. Marco whistled something jaunty enough to make floors shine more. Nathan started going to therapy. He told me 2 months in. He did not ask for a parade. He did not bring roses. He brought a small toolbox and fixed the loose cabinet door in my kitchen like penance. Kim's moved in with her sister, he said, not defensive for the first time in a decade. She says she needs space, and I said okay. Okay is a good word, I said. He handed me a screwdriver, and I tightened a hinge he had missed. I did not sue Maple Ridge for a payout. I sued them for training. I sued them for night staffing ratios that didn't leave one girl crying in a supply closet at 3 a.m. because she couldn't be in 2 rooms at once. I sued them for windows that opened onto courtyards residents could walk in without wearing a sticker that said, "Escort required." I sued them for giving Jasmine a scholarship and Teresa a budget and Marco a raise big enough to make a dent in his daughter's student loans. Victoria shaped the settlement into a document that read like a prayer and a checklist. Addison signed it with a pen her father had given her when she joined the board, a fountain pen that made a satisfying, scratchy sound like a pencil you got right on the first try. I started a program with Addison and Lucas called Night Shift Angels. The name was corny. I loved it. We funded independent advocates to visit facilities unannounced after sunset, to ask residents if they needed help to reach their glass of water, or if their call light worked, or if anyone had asked them what they wanted before they were handed a cup. We built a hotline answered not by a machine, but by nurses with enough scars on their hands to know where to press. Addison spoke to the Rotary Club and the Junior League. Lucas met with CFOS and said the words, "False savings are expensive," like a psalm. The first time a night shift angel intervened to stop a sedative order at midnight for a woman who wanted to go to the bathroom by herself, I cried harder than I had at my wedding. I visited Maple Ridge once after the settlement. I brought Lila a bag full of yarn in colors that looked like houses at dusk. She laughed so hard when she opened it she had to turn off her oxygen for a second to wipe her eyes. "Your son came," she said, trying to compose herself. "He brought me lemon cookies and apologized like he'd practiced in a mirror." I told him I forgave him because you always made sure the water in the flowers was changed, and I value that kind of thing higher than speeches. "Did you mean it?" I asked. "Close enough to count," she said. Besides, he listened when I told him my husband wore a tie the day he proposed, even though he hated ties. Anyone who listens gets forgiven by degrees. The judge sent me a letter on thick paper months later. He did not put it on official letterhead. He wrote it like a man who writes thank you notes because his mother taught him to. He told me his son had started pre-law. He told me his wife still had freckles. He told me that sometimes the only justice he could give in his courtroom was the kind that looked neat on paper, and that other times justice surprised him by showing up at 9 a.m. wearing a blue dress and a scarf tied like a memory. He thanked me for reminding him that the system is only as strong as the people in it who decide not to look away. In the spring, I sat at my kitchen table with a lemon scone and a cup of coffee and my mother's sugar bowl. The apartment sunlight is different, filtered through a row of plane trees that drip sticky seeds like punctuation. But it warmed my hair the same way. I pressed a new plant into the soil, violets. I had sworn I wouldn't try again. But a woman from church showed up with a leaf in a Ziploc bag and a dare in her eyes. "Life is for stubborn things," she said. I repotted them carefully. I watered them sparingly. I watched them every morning like a promise I was making to myself. Nathan knocked. He doesn't let himself in anymore. He waits. He stood in the doorway with a paper bag from a bakery and looked like a boy on the edge of a diving board. "Brought cinnamon rolls," he said. "You raved about them when I was 8. I pretended I didn't care. I motioned to the table. "We can both stop pretending now," I said. We ate in a silence that wasn't punishment. He wiped his fingers and said, "I visited Dad today." "The cemetery?" "The park," he corrected softly. I sat on the bench where he used to feed ducks stale bread, and I told him I'm trying. I told him I'm sorry I used him as an excuse to manage you because I was scared. I told him I hate that grief makes me do things that look like love in a photograph but feel like control in a room. I put my hand over his and pressed. "You told him the truth," I said. "He loved that even when it was messy." He looked at the violets. "They're back." "They never left," I said. "They just needed a different window." We didn't speak about Kim. We would later. We would speak about small cruelties and quiet rescues. For now, it was enough to share pastry and morning light. They invited me to speak at a conference the following fall. Care quality, ethics, elder justice. The words sound like stone columns. They are, in fact, a dozen choices made in laundry rooms and hallways and nurses' stations at 2 a.m. I told a room full of administrators and regulators and nurses and sons that safety is not a signature and kindness is not a policy. I told them that long-term care will save itself not with slogans but with improved ratios, fresh water, and the courage to say no to as needed when it is not needed. I told them that if a nurse ever says to you, "You're not leaving me on my shift," make sure she has enough people on the floor to keep that promise without breaking her back. Afterward, a young man with a badge that said State Ombudsman came up to me and said, "My grandmother died in a place like Maple Ridge, but without Addison. I didn't know what to do then. I do now." His voice shook. I hugged him and felt something inside me settle into a place like a book on its right shelf. On Christmas Eve, I baked kolaches the way Mark's mother had taught me, pinching dough between my fingers until my hands remembered. Addison and Lucas came over with their father. He's a small man with the gentle, stubborn face of someone whose life cracked once and then healed with a seam that made it stronger. He brought me a plant cutting and a story I had already heard. "I have told this on every birthday," he laughed, "but it gets better with age." "That's how you know you've told the right story," I said. Lila called from Maple Ridge with the phone on speaker so I could hear the carolers and the uneven joy of a group singing for people who might fall asleep mid-verse. "I won $6 at bingo," she announced triumphantly, and I told Teresa to stop calling me dear, like I was a blanket. "Don't scare the nurses on Christmas Eve," I scolded lightly. "I'll scare them on New Year's," she said. "The calendar demands it." Nathan came late with a tub of mashed potatoes and a face that said he had cried in his car and chosen not to hide it. "Kim signed the papers," he said. We arranged ourselves around him without commentary, like shapes in a quilt, letting the limbs and spines of family find new ways to rest. Years pass faster after a fire, I've learned. The next spring, the violets flowered like they had forgiven the world for everything. Jasmine sent a picture from her pinning ceremony with a note that read, "You're the reason I didn't quit." Teresa hired 2 more night nurses and instituted a policy that required administrators to work 1 midnight shift a month. If you cannot answer a call bell at 3 a.m., you cannot write a policy about one, she said in a memo I saved like scripture. The Attorney General reached a settlement with Stonebrook that required all facilities to post medication refusal rights at every bedside and to log audits of PRN use monthly. Lucas created a budget line item called Dignity and dared any board member to argue it down. Addison spoke at a fundraiser where she held up a photograph of me holding her like a loaf of bread and cried without apologizing. "Do you miss the ICU?" Lila asked me one afternoon as I beat eggs for a lemon curd. "I miss the part of me that knew where to stand even in chaos," I said, "but maybe I didn't lose her. Maybe she just moved floors. There is no happily ever after in real life. There is happily anyway. There is happily because. There is happily every day you make a decision that moves a needle a millimeter in the right direction. And then there are moments that feel like fairy tales because the light hits just so." On a Tuesday in June, a young woman in a green dress and sturdy shoes walked into my living room balancing a diaper bag and a baby, with eyes that did not know what wrong meant yet. "This is June," Jasmine said. "Named for my grandma. I wanted the first place she visited after church to smell like coffee and violets." June curled her fingers around my little one's ring finger the way all babies do, as if they are making an oath. I put my face close enough to smell the crown of her head, that clean milk and sun smell that makes your chest ache with an emotion too large for one word. If love is a unit of measure, then a baby's head is the standard. "Hi, June," I whispered. "We're going to make the world safer for you." Maple Ridge sent me an invitation to their summer picnic in the courtyard. I went because I wanted to watch a facility try. The grill smoked like a working man's heaven. Someone had planted a row of lavender near the bench. The administrator now was a woman in her 40s with hair she braided herself in the car. She shook my hand, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "We still mess up sometimes. We mess up less. And when we do, we write it down." "Writing is love," I said. "That was true when we charted in triplicate." "Charts are love," she agreed. "So are cookies." She pushed a plate into my hand. Lila stood by the tree with her oxygen cannula looped like a necklace and batted at a bee with comic ferocity. "It likes me," she said. "It has good taste." I kissed her hard, and she waved me away like I'd embarrassed her on purpose. "Get out of here, you big soft thing." I forgive easily, but I forgive on purpose. Months later, Nathan and I went to the farmer's market on High Street, and he watched me choose peaches the way a person watches a tide decide something. He said, "I put an offer on a condo, 2 bedrooms, 1st floor. I was going to ask you to move in with me, but I think this is better. A place for when you want sleepovers, a place for when you want to go home." "Yes," I said, and it was my yes. On the way back to my apartment, he took my hand at the curb and squeezed it when we stepped off. I squeezed back, not because I needed help, but because sometimes the point is not the help, it's the hand. The violets on my windowsill have names now. It makes me laugh to say that out loud. One is Addison, one is Lucas, one is Teresa, one is Jasmine, one is Lila, even though she is anything but delicate. I water them with a measure I learned on my mother's hip. A pinch, a bit, enough. If I put too much and the tray overflows, I wipe it up and try again tomorrow. There are worse mistakes. Sometimes I open my kitchen window in the morning, warm coffee in my chipped blue mug in my hand, steam rising like a good idea, and I imagine the courtroom again. The judge's startled face, the gasp that rippled, the moment the room realized that a woman who looked like their mother from far away was, in fact, a person who had rearranged the shape of a day for 100 families. We want our heroes young and dramatic because movies taught us that. But sometimes the hero is an old woman who knows the difference between PRN and routine and writes it down. If you love someone who is old, let them say no. If you run a place where old people live, remember that compliance is just cooperation with good reasons. If you are an old woman yourself, sit up straighter when the administrator says, "For your own good." Ask him for his data. Ask him for his ratio. Ask him for his hands to help you stand before he reaches for the cup. The night before our night shift angels hit their 1-year mark, a stack of letters arrived at my door. Not email, paper, envelopes, handwritten like someone meant it. An 86-year-old man in Marietta wrote, "They stopped giving me the sleepy pill without asking." A daughter in Cleveland wrote, "My mom asked to go outside after dinner, and someone said yes for the first time." A nurse in Toledo wrote, "I was scared to speak up, and then I called the hotline and someone told me where to stand." I read them all with the kind of concentration that hurts your back and feels like prayer. I put them in a shoebox. I wrote "keep" on the lid. At the bottom of the stack was a note from the judge. He had taped a Polaroid of his son to a piece of paper and written, "First day of law school. He thinks he's going to save the world." I told him to start with the night shift. Underneath that, in smaller letters, "Thank you." I put the photo on my fridge with a magnet shaped like Ohio. Then I sat in my kitchen in the fading light, listen to the distant hiss of cars on wet pavement, and let myself feel something I hadn't given myself much permission to feel in the rush of doing, investigating, fixing, insisting. Relief. It is quieter than victory. It does not climb onto tables and smack the ceiling with a broom. It sits with you as you finish your coffee and says, "You are not crazy. You were right to fight." There is a rumor, whispered in break rooms, murmured on park benches, that I single-handedly took down a corporation, that I marched into court and made a judge remember his own life, and the whole thing turned on a dime. That is tidy. That is television. The truth is better and harder. The truth is a chain made of many hands, each link catching the next. The truth is Addison writing a letter because her mother's story still lived in her. It is Lucas believing numbers can be moral. It is Victoria refusing to weaponize grief. It is Teresa risking her job on a sentence said out loud in a hallway. It is Jasmine sliding a prayer card under the fold of a crochet square like a spy. It is an old woman writing in a notebook with neat print while a machine down the hall beeped because it needed water, not medicine. I keep the newspaper clipping in a frame beneath the violets, not because I think I'm a saint, because it reminds me that one day you do a thing at 2 a.m. you do not think is huge, and it turns out to be the foundation of your life. The photo is of me help wrapping a baby burrito who hated the flash. You can't see my face well. You can see my hands. They are steady. Some nights I imagine a different courtroom. The one where the first person who told my son he was doing the right thing had to stand up and say she was wrong. The one where a nurse putting pills into cups realized she had charted her way into stealing mornings from other people. The one where an administrator thought about ratios at 3 a.m. and did not go back to sleep. Justice, it turns out, is not something you hold up like a trophy. It is a practice. It is the way you do Tuesday. On the anniversary of Mark's death, I went to the park where he fed ducks. I sat on his bench with a brown paper bag of stale bread we would have argued about wasting and looked at the sky reflected in the pond, like a patient after extubation watching his first clean breath. Nathan walked up slowly and sat without asking. That was new. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of my kitchen window from the yard. Violets lined up like patients waiting for rounds. I told the realtor to leave them, he said. They didn't. I was too late. But I went to the estate sale and found the old pot with the chip, and I bought it. I thought maybe you could put it on your sill and it could be the one thing that came back. I traced the chip with my finger. I felt both sting and balm. Thank you, I said. He nodded. We didn't speak for a minute. Ducks made portable commas on the water. Mom? Yes, Nathan. I'm going to volunteer for Night Shift Angels. I smiled. Of course you are, I said. Bring cookies. The aides eat dinner at 4, and the night is long. He laughed, a little with his ribs like he used to. He looked like his father when he did that. He looked like the boy who had chosen me before he knew there were other choices. When I walked back to my apartment, the hallway smelled like someone else's dinner, which is to say it smelled like a building full of lives. My door opened on violets and a philodendron and a coffee cup sitting clean on the rack. I boiled water in a new kettle that whistled correctly and didn't lie. I poured it over leaves like a benediction. I set the chip-rimmed mug beside me like a friend and started writing letters to the people who would come after me. Not instructions, invitations. How to ask a nurse her real name. How to say no without making enemies of people who will help you later. How to save a life by insisting that a chart reflect a person. How to look a judge with human eyes in the face and make him remember the thing he forgot on purpose. Every time I think the story is over, someone calls. A niece with a question about paperwork, a pastor with an elder whose pocket is full of pill dust, a stranger who heard my name on a whisper and says, "Is this the nurse?" I answer. I will always answer until my hands forget how to hold a receiver, and when mine can't, someone else will. Someone who was a child in a story their mother told. Someone who had a grandmother who smelled like lemon cookies. Someone who was a son who found the edge of himself and stepped back. If you had asked me a year ago whether I believed in miracles, I would have said, carefully, that I believed in systems improved by stubbornness. Now I say this: sometimes a miracle is a letter that arrives at the exact hour you need it. Sometimes it is a judge who says, "It's her," at the exact moment a room needs to remember a person is not a file. Mostly miracles are made from hands. Yours, mine, Teresa's, Jasmine's, Nathan's. The hand that holds a pen over a paper that will decide where an old woman sleeps. The hand that moves a cup out of arm's reach so it doesn't spill and then moves it back again because dignity tastes like water at midnight. The violets are blooming again this morning. The apartment hums in that way a morning hums when you have time for both sorrow and toast. The mug clicks on the counter, content. Outside, a bus sighs to a stop and then exhales. There is nothing dramatic to see here. There is an old woman sitting in the light she chose, telling you this story because she promised a room full of people once that she would, because she learned, too late and just in time, that telling the truth is a form of care, because somewhere a nurse is saying, "You are not leaving me on my shift." And I want the world to rise up and make that a promise, not a threat. People think what happened in the courtroom that morning changed everything. It didn't. It revealed what had been true all along, that who we are in the quiet hours builds the life that shows up when a gavel falls. The judge looked up and said, "It's her," because once, in a night so bright with fluorescent lights that it might as well have been noon, I kept someone's wife and daughter and future from slipping away. He recognized more than a nurse. He recognized a person who refused to unlearn what mattered. So if you see me in the grocery store picking over peaches like I'm choosing which stories to keep, say hello. Ask me how I am. I will tell you the truth. The truth is that I am exactly as fine as a person can be who knows how easily things tip toward wrong and how glorious it is when they tilt back, one little adjustment at a time. I am Evelyn Hart. I am 71 years old. I am a retired ICU nurse. I water my violets once a week. I drink my coffee black. I answer my phone. I keep a notebook in my cardigan pocket because you never know when you'll need to write the time down. And when someone needs me to say, "You're not leaving me on my shift," I still can. I still will.